The air in the grand ballroom was thick with a polished hum, a low thrum of expensive conversations and clinking glasses. Tonight was the annual Thorn Industries Charity Gala, a glittering display of power and philanthropy. Young Ethan, just 22, stood a little apart from the main crowd, his eyes sharp and perceptive, scanning the room. He couldn't hear the music, the laughter, or the clink of ice in crystal, but he felt the vibrations, the subtle shifts in atmosphere. His father, William Thorn, a titan of industry, was at the podium, his voice booming through the meticulously designed sound system. William spoke of innovation, of giving back, and then, almost as an afterthought, he made a subtle reference to his son, Ethan's, challenges, and the importance of overcoming adversity. Ethan didn't need to hear the words to understand the underlying message. He'd seen that look, felt that tone, countless times. It was the look of pity, of dismissal, wrapped in a thin veneer of paternal pride. He was the billionaire's son, yes, but also the deaf son, a detail his father always managed to highlight, even when trying to sound supportive. Ethan watched his father's lips move, read the almost imperceptible micro-expressions on the faces of the audience. They applauded, a ripple of polite admiration for William's magnanimity, for his brave son. Ethan remained perfectly still, a quiet observer in a loud world. Later, away from the main hall, in a hushed corridor, William found Ethan. The smile from the podium was gone, replaced by a stern, businesslike expression. "Ethan," William began, his voice low but firm, "we need to talk about your future. This obsession with mechanical engineering, it's simply not realistic. Not for someone with your limitations." He paused, letting the unspoken weight of Ethan's deafness hang in the air. "I've arranged for you to start an internship in our finance department. It's a more suitable path, less demanding, more manageable." Ethan didn't flinch. His face remained unreadable, a mask of calm. He simply looked at his father, his gaze steady, unwavering. Inside, a familiar knot tightened in his stomach. His passion, his dream, dismissed as a childish fantasy, a hobby deemed unsuitable because of something he couldn't change. He watched his father's mouth form the words, saw the conviction in his eyes, the absolute certainty that he knew best. William didn't see Ethan's capabilities. He only saw his perceived lack. Ethan, however, saw his father fully, a man who valued control and reputation above all else. He took a slow, deliberate breath, his stillness a stark contrast to the storm brewing within him. He simply nodded, a small, almost imperceptible movement that gave nothing away. Suddenly, a harsh, grating feedback shrieked through the ballroom speakers, cutting off the smooth jazz that had just begun. The expensive sound system, a new product from a Thorn Industries subsidiary and heavily promoted at the gala, sputtered and died. A ripple of discomfort spread through the crowd. Technicians scrambled, looking flustered. William, back in the main hall, looked annoyed, his carefully curated event momentarily marred. Without a word, Ethan moved. He walked past the confused technicians, his steps precise and unhurried. He reached the main control panel, a complex array of wires and circuits, and his hands, long and agile, went to work. With surprising precision, he identified a loose connection, a critical component that had vibrated out of place. He adjusted it, a tiny, almost imperceptible twist of his wrist. The sound system clicked back to life, the jazz returning, clearer and richer than before. A wave of applause swept through the room, a collective sigh of relief. Most people assumed the technicians had fixed it. But William, standing a short distance away, had watched his son. He saw the brief, confident movements, the way Ethan's fingers had moved with an almost intuitive understanding of the machinery. A flicker of confusion crossed his face, followed by a dawning realization that he couldn't quite grasp. Ethan didn't wait for recognition. He simply turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd, leaving his father standing there, perplexed. The quietest voices often carry the loudest truths. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're watching from in the comments. The story of Ethan and William Thorne didn't start in a gala ballroom. It began years earlier, nestled in the lavish, sprawling Thorne estate in upstate New York. It was a place of manicured lawns, towering gates, and an almost oppressive quiet. A world that felt both grand and strangely empty. Ethan grew up surrounded by opulence, the kind of wealth that insulated him from the everyday world. But money couldn't buy connection, and despite the endless amenities, his childhood was often a solitary one. His days were filled with a rotating cast of nannies, private tutors, and specialists dedicated to his condition. His father, William Thorne, a man whose name was synonymous with industrial innovation and ruthless business acumen, was a distant figure, always preoccupied with the next big deal, the next groundbreaking invention for Thorne Industries. The Thorne family legacy was a heavy cloak, woven with threads of philanthropy and technological advancement, but it often seemed to smother individual needs. William saw himself as a visionary, a man destined to leave an indelible mark on the world, and his personal life often played second fiddle to his grand ambitions. Ethan's mother, a beautiful socialite, moved through her days with elegant grace, doting on Ethan in her own way. But ultimately, she was a reflection of William's will. Her affection was a soft comfort, yet she never challenged William's decisions, always deferring to his dominant presence. The family dynamics were like a perfectly staged photograph. Outwardly flawless, but beneath the surface, a vast emotional distance separated them. Ethan's routine was meticulously planned. He attended specialized schools for the deaf, where he learned to navigate a world designed for sound. But even these efforts felt less about empowering him and more about fixing him. The unspoken message was always there. His deafness was a problem to be overcome, a hurdle to be cleared, rather than a part of who he was. This constant pressure to conform, to be normal, was a heavy burden. Ethan's vulnerability wasn't about his inability to hear. It stemmed from a deep, aching longing for his father's genuine approval, not just his tolerance or pity. He craved a real connection, a father who saw him for his intelligence, his curiosity, his unique way of understanding the world, not just as the son who couldn't hear. William Thorne truly believed he was doing what was best for Ethan. He saw himself as a loving, albeit stern father, guiding his son towards a path of success within the family empire. He was a self-made man, proud of his achievements, and he viewed Ethan's deafness as an unfortunate deviation from the perfect heir he envisioned. His attempts to fix Ethan, whether through expensive therapies or pushing him towards safer career paths, were, in his mind, acts of love. But his methods were often dismissive, emotionally damaging, and fueled by his own discomfort with anything that didn't fit his rigid definition of perfection. He didn't understand that by trying to erase Ethan's limitation, he was also erasing a part of his son's identity, his unique perspective. This emotional backdrop, this constant subtle invalidation, was the fertile ground from which the conflict at the gala had sprung, a long, simmering resentment waiting for its moment to boil over. The quiet boy who fixed the sound system was not just a genius. He was a son desperate to be seen, to be heard. by the one person who seemed determined to remain deaf to his true potential. The seeds of that gala night's tension had been sown years before, through countless small moments that chipped away at the bond between Ethan and William. It wasn't one big fight that broke them, but a slow, steady erosion, like water wearing down stone. Ethan could recall a dozen instances, each one a tiny crack in his trust. There was the school play, his first time on stage, where he'd memorized all the cues, ready to perform his small, silent part. William had promised to be there, a rare commitment, but a last-minute business deal had pulled him away. His assistant had called, apologizing profusely, explaining that William was providing for his future. Ethan remembered sitting backstage, the vibrant energy of the other kids fading into a dull ache. The empty seat in the audience, a glaring hole. It happened again with his science fair project, a complex model of a hydroelectric dam he'd spent months building. William's excuse was the same, always about work, always about his future, as if a future built without his presence was worth more. Then there were the veiled humiliations. Ethan remembered a fancy dinner party when he was around 10. He was signing enthusiastically with a family friend who knew ASL, explaining how a new computer game worked. William, noticing the animated conversation across the table, had called out, "Ethan, speak up, son. Don't rely on those hand gestures so much. People need to understand you properly." The words, meant to be helpful, felt like a public correction, a statement that his way of communicating was somehow less than. Everyone at the table had gone quiet, their smiles stiffening. Another time, William had been showing off Ethan's special school to a business associate, talking about the advanced programs for children with challenges. Ethan had stood there, a forced smile on his face, feeling like a display item, a testament to his father's generosity, rather than a person with his own abilities. The condescension, though perhaps unintended by William, was sharp and clear to Ethan. William's manipulation was more subtle, a constant pressure to steer Ethan away from what he loved. Whenever Ethan talked about gears, circuits, or the intricate workings of machines, William would nod, but then quickly change the subject to business management or finance. "Engineering is a tough field, Ethan," he'd say, his voice gentle but firm. "Especially with your particular needs. Maybe something in corporate strategy? You're so good with numbers." He framed it as practical advice, looking out for Ethan's best interests, but Ethan knew it was about control, about fitting him into a mold William had designed. He was pushing Ethan towards manageable fields, things that wouldn't challenge William's perception of his son's limitations. One memory stood out, a moment of profound injustice that resonated deeply within Ethan. When he was about 8, he'd spent months secretly building a small, rudimentary hearing aid prototype using scavenged parts from old electronics. It was clunky, not perfect, but it was his invention. He'd brought it to William with trembling hands, a mix of pride and hope shining in his eyes. William had picked it up, examined it for a moment, and then, with a dismissive chuckle, placed it back on the table. "That's a nice toy, son," he'd said, patting Ethan's head. "Very creative. But real engineers build real things, not just little gadgets." He hadn't seen the hours of work, the intricate thought, the desperate hope that it might bridge the gap between their worlds. He had simply called it a toy. That moment, more than any other, had instilled in Ethan a feeling of being unheard and undervalued, a deep frustration that his father couldn't see past his deafness to recognize his true potential. These cumulative experiences, these quiet wounds, meant the gala incident wasn't just a brief clash. It was the final straw, the culmination of years of a deeply fractured relationship, ready to finally break. As Ethan moved into his late teens and early 20s, the emotional atmosphere at home became increasingly stifling. His quiet desire for independence, fueled by those earlier slights and his father's dismissiveness, now clashed directly with William's rigid expectations. The unspoken tension that had always existed between them started to boil over, manifesting in more frequent and intense conflicts. These weren't loud, shouting matches. Those were rare in the Thorne household. Instead, they were silent battles, fought through interpreters or written notes, often centered around Ethan's career choices. Ethan insisted on pursuing mechanical engineering, a field where he felt truly alive and capable. William, however, saw it as a stubborn defiance of his carefully laid plans. His attempts to control Ethan's life became more overt, less about subtle nudges and more about direct commands. He'd arrange meetings with financial advisors or introduce Ethan to executives in various non-technical departments of Thorne Industries, always steering the conversation away from anything that involved designing or building. Ethan would sit through these meetings, his face impassive, his mind miles away, sketching gears or circuit diagrams on a notepad beneath the table. Beyond their immediate family, there was also the constant hum of social pressure. Extended family members, distant cousins, and even some board members of Thorne Industries would quietly question Ethan's suitability to inherit the family empire. These whispers weren't always direct, but they found their way to Ethan, subtly influenced by William's own doubts. He'd overhear snippets of conversations at family gatherings, people talking about the future of the company and the need for a hands-on leader. The implication was always clear. Ethan, with his limitations, wasn't that leader. The pressure created an unbearable external weight, adding to his internal struggle. He felt like he was constantly being judged, not for his abilities, but for his deafness. William's posture became more authoritarian as Ethan grew older. The gentle suggestions turned into the ultimatums. "If you're going to pursue this engineering hobby," William stated one evening, his voice firm but controlled, "you'll do it on your own dime. Thorne Industries needs a leader, not an inventor tinkering in a garage." He even threatened to cut off financial support, a stark warning that his love, though present, was conditional. It was tied directly to Ethan fulfilling his father's dreams, to becoming the perfect heir William envisioned, one who would seamlessly fit into the corporate structure, not challenge it with unconventional passions. William truly believed he was doing what was best for Ethan, that he was protecting him from a difficult path, but his methods were crushing Ethan's spirit. Ethan felt trapped, his identity being suffocated by his father's expectations and the pervasive societal judgment. He was surrounded by luxury, by people who supposedly cared for him, yet he felt utterly isolated. He yearned for genuine recognition, not pity or tolerance. He wanted his father to see his brilliance, his passion, his capability, not just his deafness. This period marked the peak of his emotional struggle, a suffocating weight of unfulfilled dreams and parental disapproval. He was on the verge of a definitive break, an internal line about to be crossed. He knew he couldn't continue living under this shadow, constantly fighting for the right to be himself. The gilded cage of his privileged life was becoming unbearable, and he desperately needed to find a way out, to breathe freely and pursue his own path, even if it meant abandoning everything he had ever known. The silence of his world was now amplified by the silence of his father's understanding. a profound disconnect that spoke volumes. The breaking point arrived, not with a shouted argument or a dramatic confrontation, but with a quiet, devastating discovery. Ethan was researching new patents, something he did constantly, always looking for innovation, when he stumbled upon something that froze him. It was a patent application for a hearing aid, remarkably similar in concept to the crude but brilliant prototype he had built as a child, the one his father had dismissed as a toy. The patent belonged not to Thorn Industries, but to a small, obscure tech firm that had recently been acquired by a holding company. Digging deeper, Ethan found the holding company's primary investor, William Thorn. The realization hit him like a physical blow. His father hadn't just ignored his early invention, he had actively funded its development elsewhere, years after telling Ethan it was impractical, years after subtly discouraging his son's interest in the very field where this technology would thrive. It wasn't just a lack of faith, it was a profound betrayal, a calculated undermining of his son's dreams. This wasn't about protection, it was about control, about ensuring Ethan never truly stepped outside the mold William had created for him. Ethan felt a cold anger settle in his gut, a quiet fury that was far more dangerous than any outburst. In that moment, everything shifted. The yearning for his father's approval, the desperate hope for connection, it all dissolved. There was nothing left to salvage. Ethan made a profound, silent decision. He would leave. He would pursue his engineering passion, not just independently, but with a fierce determination to prove his father wrong, not for William's sake, but for his own. This was his declaration of war, not with shouts, but with unwavering resolve. He would build his own legacy, one free from the shadow of Thorn Industries. He would show the world, and more importantly, himself, what he was truly capable of. William, perhaps sensing Ethan's growing defiance, or perhaps just moving ahead with his long-standing plans, made his own public statement. In a highly publicized press conference, William Thorn announced the appointment of a new CEO for Thorn Industries. It wasn't Ethan. It was a seasoned executive from a rival conglomerate, a move that effectively disinherited Ethan in the most public and humiliating way possible. William justified it with carefully chosen words, speaking of the need for dynamic leadership and Ethan's unwillingness to adapt to the rigorous demands of a global enterprise. The message was clear. Ethan was out. The family legacy, the one he had been groomed for, was suddenly snatched away. But even as William delivered this crushing blow, an unexpected opportunity arose. Ethan's former mentor, a man named Alex, an ex-Navy SEAL who had transitioned into a brilliant tech innovator, heard about the unfolding drama. Alex had been a guest lecturer at Ethan's specialized engineering school years ago, and he had immediately recognized Ethan's unique brilliance. He saw Ethan's deafness not as a limitation, but as a different perspective, a unique lens through which to approach sensory technology. Alex reached out, not with pity, but with an offer. He needed a lead engineer for his cutting-edge startup, a place where innovation was paramount and conventional thinking was discarded. He offered Ethan a position where his deafness was not just accepted, but valued, seen as a strength that could lead to revolutionary breakthroughs. This was the path Ethan had longed for, a chance to break free, to validate his abilities on his own terms. It was a lifeline, thrown just as he felt himself drowning in the aftermath of his father's betrayal. This single offer completely shifted the narrative. The cycle of suffering, of seeking approval and facing constant dismissal, was about to end. Ethan was no longer a victim of his father's expectations. He was on the brink of an empowered trajectory, ready to build something entirely his own. The world had just opened up, offering a future far more exciting and fulfilling than anything Thorn Industries could ever provide. Ethan felt the immediate, sharp pain of his decision and his father's public declaration. It was like a physical blow, a deep ache that settled in his chest. He had made the choice to walk away, but the reality of losing everything he had known, the family legacy that had always been his, hit harder than he expected. Public humiliation stung, a bitter taste in his mouth. He grappled with the loss, with the sudden emptiness where a future had once been clearly laid out. Old doubts, whispers from his childhood, started to creep back in. Was he truly capable? Had his father been right all along about his limitations? Years of paternal conditioning, of being told what he could and couldn't do because of his deafness, had left scars. Even with Alex's offer, a fear of the uncertain future gnawed at him. It was a deep, unsettling feeling, a constant companion in his quiet moments. He knew he had made the right choice for himself, but the path ahead was completely unknown, and that was terrifying. His mother, always a distant figure, expressed her quiet sadness. She called him, her voice tinged with a familiar weariness, saying she understood but wished things were different. She didn't actively oppose William, a pattern Ethan had seen his whole life. Her sadness was genuine, he thought, but it was also passive, an acceptance of William's will. But then there were others, his close friends from his specialized school, the ones who truly understood what it meant to navigate the world as a deaf person, rallied around him. They sent messages, visited him, and offered quiet encouragement. They saw his choice not as rebellion, but as liberation. They reminded him of his brilliance, of his unique way of seeing the world. Their support was a balm to his wounded spirit, a stark contrast to the reactions from other parts of his life. Some distant relatives and business associates, however, weren't so understanding. They openly criticized his rebellious choice, their words dripping with judgment. They sided with William, seeing him as the strong, decisive patriarch, and Ethan as the ungrateful son who threw away immense privilege. In their eyes, Ethan had made a foolish mistake, walking away from a golden opportunity. This reflected a common American cultural dynamic, where self-made success and family dynasty were highly valued. William was seen as a man protecting his empire, even if his methods were harsh. Ethan was simply seen as naive. The psychological impact was profound. He felt a strange mix of liberation and immense pressure. The chains of his father's expectations were broken, but now he had to prove himself, not just to the world, but to himself. He needed to forge an identity outside the behemoth that was Thorn Industries. It was a deep, internal shift, forcing him to confront who he was at his core, stripped of his inherited status. His former Navy SEAL mentor, Alex, became an increasingly crucial figure during this time. Alex provided more than just technical guidance. He offered a different kind of mentorship, one rooted in resilience and a sense of belonging. He didn't pity Ethan. He saw his strength, his unique perspective. Alex understood that Ethan's deafness was not just a physical condition, but a way of experiencing the world that could lead to innovative solutions others might miss. He encouraged Ethan to lean into that difference, to see it as a superpower. With Alex, Ethan found not just a boss, but a kindred spirit, someone who truly believed in his capabilities and helped him rebuild his confidence, piece by painful piece. He was learning to stand on his own, not despite his deafness, but because of the unique strengths it had given him. Ethan, now fully immersed in Alex's startup, dedicated every ounce of his focused energy to his new venture. The frustrations and pain from his past with William became fuel for innovation, not a burden. He poured his unique understanding of sound and silence, honed by a lifetime of deafness, into developing groundbreaking technology. He wasn't just building products, he was building a new identity, brick by painful, exhilarating brick. Meanwhile, back at Thorn Industries, William Thorn faced unforeseen challenges. The new CEO, a man handpicked by William for his corporate ruthlessness, rather than his innovative vision, struggled to maintain the company's competitive edge. A series of poor decisions, coupled with a fundamental lack of understanding of Thorn Industries' core values, which, ironically, had always been about pushing boundaries, led to stagnation. The company, once a titan, began to falter. Public perception of William, once unassailable, began to shift. Whispers about his treatment of Ethan, once dismissed as family drama, quietly surfaced in industry circles and online forums. His carefully crafted public image, built on decades of philanthropy and industrial prowess, started to erode, chipping away at the foundation of his empire. Ethan's startup, however, was soaring. Free from the corporate politics and emotional baggage of Thorn Industries, his team thrived. He developed a revolutionary device, a sensory integration system that went beyond traditional hearing aids. It combined advanced haptic feedback with visual cues and a nuanced interpretation of sound frequencies, allowing users with profound deafness to experience the world in a completely new, richer way. It wasn't just a product. It was a testament to his unique perspective, a powerful statement that deafness was not a disability to be overcome, but a different lens through which to view and innovate. His success was undeniable, not just financially, but as a profound validation of his vision and unwavering resilience. One day, William, watching a news report about Ethan's device, saw a young girl, born deaf, react with pure joy as she experienced music for the first time through Ethan's invention. He saw the tears in her parents' eyes, the way her body vibrated with the rhythm. In that moment, something inside him shifted. He saw not just a successful product, but a life-changing miracle. He finally recognized the true magnitude of his son's genius and the profound injustice he had inflicted. The weight of his past actions, the dismissal, the undermining, the public humiliation, crashed down on him. Thorn Industries was declining, his legacy tarnished, and his son was not just surviving, but thriving, changing the world in a way William himself had never dared to imagine. He sought Ethan out, not at a grand corporate event, but at a quiet coffee shop near Ethan's new office. William looked older, his usual imperious demeanor replaced by a genuine weariness. He apologized, a simple, raw apology, acknowledging his mistakes, his pride, and his inability to see Ethan for who he truly was. It wasn't a demand for forgiveness, but an offering of regret. The story concluded with Ethan, standing tall and self-assured on his own terms. He had achieved success and profound personal fulfillment, not by fitting into his father's mold, but by breaking free and forging his own path. While the past could never be erased, and the scars remained, William's apology, however late, opened a tiny, fragile path towards healing. It would be a long, difficult journey, and it would be on Ethan's terms, if at all. The narrative reflected on the incredible power of self-belief, the true, often misunderstood, meaning of legacy, and how sometimes the greatest strength is found not in conformity, but in embracing one's unique differences. turning perceived weaknesses into unparalleled strengths.